Hello and welcome. I'm Britt Herring. Joining me today is Heather Chase, the current Vermont State Representative for Chester. Heather is also the candidate for that same office in the upcoming election on November 5th. So for the next half hour, we're going to dive into some of the most pressing issues that are facing Chester in particular and Vermont in general. Heather, thank you so much for sitting down with me. I'm so excited to talk with you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. So I just wanted to jump right in and have you tell us a little bit about your journey to Montpelier in the State House.
Well, I moved to Vermont 22 years ago, have raised 4 children here in Chester, over in Chester, and got involved with of course, having your kids in the school system, you get involved with a lot of different things. And after they started going to college and flying the coop, so to speak, I had a little bit more time and was convinced to run for the select board. And I was on the select board for 9 years. And we've had really great representation in Chester. And the last few representatives asked me if I'd run, but until my kids were really out of college, I didn't feel like I could spend the time doing it. But about 2.5 years ago or so, I decided to throw my hat into the ring and ran for. It's now the Windsor-Windham district, and it includes Chester, Athens, Grafton, and Windham. But Chester's the major population in the district. And so I ran and thoroughly enjoyed it. Well, enjoyed it mostly. It's a huge learning curve, but I've done it for the last 2 years and I've learned a great deal. And I'm hoping to be reelected to build on that foundation, because it does take quite a while to become a real knowledgeable legislator.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
A lot to learn.
Yeah. So a couple of things we want to talk about, some of that legislation, and you just mentioned your kids, getting out of college, so that's so important to so many parents. And you and I were talking about a little bit over the phone in preparation for this interview of the 802 education bill. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about that, because some of the things that you hit on are just, I think, a lot of details that maybe some Vermonters don't really know the scope of that legislation.
Well, and I do want to say that we had 1,199 bills presented over the course of the biennium. And there's a great deal of things to review and understand, right? Like in the press, we cover a few things, but we're doing so many positive things. And one of these things is we really are looking at workforce. I'm on commerce and economic development. So we've focused a lot of work on the workforce. And we have in Vermont, we have the highest level of graduation from high school, but the lowest from college. So there's that gap of how do we help folks who graduate from high school get good jobs that are paying well, that they can have a good quality of life in Vermont and increase the tax base too, right?
Yeah.
So 802 opportunity grants are really for families that have income of $75,000 or less per household, and the education is no tuition at all. And I think that that's really good, and we focused on some of the trades and some of the occupations that we really need more people in the state: nurses, dental hygienists, to name a few, teachers. We've done loan forgiveness. So there was a huge workforce bill in the first year that I was in the legislature, and I think that that has had such a positive effect, and we're going to really see much more positive effects. Sometimes you plant these seeds, right? You have to have the vision for the future, and you plant the seeds, but perhaps you don't see all the benefits of your intervention, the laws, what we're doing, until much later. And this is one of them that we'll see later. But even if people want to take a class or two, get their feet into the system, It's just a really great opportunity for Vermonters to have a little bit more education or trade.
That's amazing. And so that covers all the state universities, community colleges.
Yes, CCVs. Yeah. So really a positive thing.
That's an amazing opportunity. So how might a young person who's watching this today and wants to find out how to take advantage of that, where would they go to?
Well, I just Googled it, 802 opportunity, and it came up. CCV has a website, VSAC has a website, and it's all on there.
That's amazing.
Yeah, in much more detail that I can tell you. But that was something that, you know, as a legislator, I was proud to be a part of that. There's been a lot of, I think, misinformation and negativity in this election cycle. And when I went back really to know that I was meeting with you today, there have been so many positive things that the legislature has done to improve the quality of life and our experience living in Vermont.
Yeah, I mean, education is everything. It's, you know, my father used to say to me, it's the one thing that they can never take away from you.
Yeah, my dad and grandparents said that to me too. Yeah.
So I think one of the hot button issues in this election has been the clean heat standard.
Oh yeah.
And I think there's a lot of misinformation flying around about it. And it can be scary for when you're sitting down at the kitchen table. Definitely a kitchen table issue. So my wife and I have been up here for 2 years. It's an older housing stock. You know, our house is on heating oil. We took advantage of the things that were out there through the state to put in heat pumps, which are certainly helping. But our house is never going to be able to fit to move away completely from heating oil. We don't really have the room to put in a stove or a pellet stove or something like that. So help our voters to understand a little bit more about the scare tactics that are coming in to make you thinking that, like, hey, they're going to get socked with this huge bill. So I think that's what scares people the most.
It does scare people. And on the campaign trail, well, I'm knocking on doors. People have let me know that this is a really scary thing for them. On one hand, it's so unfortunate that we have to get people in that motivated by fear mongering. The legislature started working on this before I was in the legislature, and the bill did not go through the previous term, and my predecessor voted against it, at the very last moment. They've improved upon it, and this legislative session, this past one, I voted to pass the bill. And I want to say that some of the reason I am proud of this is because Vermonters are actually, the legislature is stepping up to look at the problem. I'm not sure we're at the perfect solution yet, but we're working on it. And what we've asked is for the PUC to take a look, Public Utilities Commission. The board is totally made up of the governor's appointees to take a look at what we're trying to do. And what we're trying to do is to get our carbon footprint decreased and go from one of the big sources of our carbon footprint in Vermont is heating oil, and the other one is transportation. So we're needing to look at those. I think it's a responsibility of the legislature to have some creative thinking and forward thinking. So in that respect, I think that this is really a positive thing. We're going to get a report back that the PUC is drilling down on sometime in early January, and then we will be able to look at what things cost, what are the ramifications if we were to implement all of this. So we're still working on it, and there aren't any decisions that really have been made, but I do think that to deny climate change when we're having flooding, poor Barry, poor Montpelier, to see the devastation of the flooding. We in Vermont, we have rivers and mountains, and we have a lot of buildings on rivers. there's no denying, in my view, climate change. So I think we need to tweak things, but we do need to look at it. So the positive part of it is that there are 180 legislators up in Montpelier. Some are so bright about climate and this energy and how we can get to the goals that we want. And so that's the positive. We're going to have to see what comes back. Maybe we change it, maybe we reassess it, maybe the governor wants to come and help us out and have some creative thinking and sit down at the table. I do think Vermonters want us to pursue reducing our carbon footprint and being better citizens and stewards of this planet. I really do, going door to door, hearing from my constituents. Is this perfect? Let's see. January we'll be able to really drill down on it. Yeah, excuse the pun.
Oh, no, I like that. No, like you said, there's no denying what's going on with our climate right now anymore. It's, you know, it is starting to get catastrophic, and like you said, climate change is really expensive. You know, I heard something the other day. I love this saying, is that like your politician might not believe in climate change, but your insurance agent does.
Oh, and I was fortunate enough to go to the National Association of Insurance Commissioners meeting in Florida. As a legislator, I represented our committee. And I heard from a lot of the commissioners, but the Alaska insurance commissioner basically said what you just said. She said, okay, climate, you can argue if you believe it or not, but what we're seeing with claims, and what she was saying is, you know, long term, it's not what the cost of insurance is going to be, it's going to be whether you get it or not. And so, you know, this is coming from someone who really knows. I am going back to the national meeting again this year, so learning a lot about insurances, commerce, economic development. Our committee deals with all insurances except healthcare. So we're busy with all this riveting information on insurance.
So in a nutshell, when you're knocking on doors, when you're talking to voters, and someone says to you, "Hey, my fear is that I've already got too much month at the end of the money, and I can't take another hit on my heating bill, on my heating oil," how do you assuage some of those fears with them?
Well, we haven't taken full action yet. We don't know. So the report's coming back. If I'm elected, the whole legislature is going to be able to take a look at it. And I don't believe the legislature that I know is going to vote for a $7 per gallon or a $4 per gallon. We don't know. And those numbers were hypothetical, and I think off the top of someone's head that then caught some momentum. Sure. And the fear is there. So I try to allay their fear, because I get concerned that we have constituents that are fearful of things that may not even happen, you know?
Yeah.
I think the fear-mongering has some really negative effects on our well-being and our mental health. And I'm sad about that.
Yeah.
That
misinformation, disinformation is the
right.
great enemy of our future.
Yeah, and to be fair, some of these things are super complex, and so explaining them or understanding them takes quite a bit of work, whereas getting people riled up takes a few sentences.
Exactly. Yeah. Another one that I think is really important to start thinking about is, you know, gun legislation in our country. It's something that feels so out of control to so many people, and that, you know, what steps can we take? You know, there's not too many politicians out there who are saying that we need to ban guns and that they're going to confiscate guns. That's I don't see that ever happening. But one of the pieces that you and I talked about last night a little bit was Act 45. That's the gun suicide prevention bill. And this was really intriguing to me. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was passed in 2023 and by overwhelming numbers, but it really asked for a 3-day waiting period. Most of the time with suicidal ideation or a person thinking I want to kill myself, if we can stop them for a period of time, they'll move out of the suicidal ideation. Golden Gate Bridge is now putting up barriers, and other places in the country, barriers for people so they don't jump. Vermont decided it was a 3-day waiting period before you can get a gun. We've had some feedback on that it's actually saved some people's lives already. So that makes me feel very positive. There's also a part of it that talks about safekeeping in your home. So I would suggest that, people lock up their guns, make sure that they're out of reach of children, don't store the bullets and the guns together. There's all this common sense that we can have our guns and our children and people can be safe. So that was positive. In 2024, we passed a ghost gun bill, and that's for 3D printing guns, which is amazing that you can do that. You do need to register them and get a serial number in Vermont. So those are little things compared to the huge problem, but we're hoping that these things do make a difference. We don't, in our country, there are weapons of war. And where I come down on this, and I think I should be open with my voters about my opinions on everything from reproductive rights to guns to whatever. But I don't think we need weapons of war in our homes. And I'm pretty clear that weapons of war, guns, hunting. I grew up in Wyoming. There were always hunters around. Absolutely fine culture, but weapons of war are another thing.
Yeah, I grew up in a hunting culture myself, and most of the guys that I knew who really followed fair chase thinking,
Right.
Many of them hunted with a weapon that only had one shot.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Because they wanted to make 100% sure that if you're going to take that shot, it's the right shot.
Yeah.
I don't think any of them would ever consider a spray action 9mm.
Yeah. Right.
But anyway, I think it's great for you. I think it's great that you are open with your constituents about that one.
Well, there's a lot of different things that I think one of the Republican things that they're doing is they aren't coming out telling us how they feel or believe on certain things. So that concerns me. I want my viewers to know, or your viewers, but our constituents to know that I'm for reproductive rights. I was happy that we passed the amendment. This session I may be working on some IVF legislation because a constituent has brought that issue to me, that insurances in Vermont don't need to contribute to the cost of IVF. So there's a lot of different things that we can do. And reproductive rights, we also passed a shield bill protecting our healthcare workers in the event that people come to Vermont for exercising reproductive rights, that our healthcare providers are protected. That's super important to me. So, yeah.
Excellent. It's important to me too. Another one that we talked about, and this is something that the internet has been this incredible gate to a lot of amazing access to information,
Right.
and to a future that I don't think any of us could have imagined
No.
in 1990. It seems almost impossible to imagine, really digest it sometimes. But of course, having our information out there It's just, you almost assume that your information is stolen now. How many millions of Americans, you read about these data breaches, that it's staggering, So one of the things that I was reading about last night is the VDPA, the Vermont Data Privacy Act.
Right.
And that's a big one. One of the things that I thought was so interesting is that we're the first state with comprehensive privacy law and private right of action. Can you explain that one a little bit? It's so interesting to me.
And it did not pass. It was vetoed by the governor. It was H-121, and my committee did a lot of work on that. Monique Priestley, who is a rep in Vermont, did an extraordinarily amount of work on this project, and so did our chair, Mike Marcotte, who's a Republican, and Democrats. And people talk about, what would you do to be more bipartisan? Or we work really well together on our committee and see eye to eye on much more than what we don't see eye to eye on, right? But the Privacy Act had a lot. It comes basically down to who owns your data. And it's not just your name, your social security, your street address, it's your irises. Like, do you own your face, or does a company own your face? And we spent, I think the bill ended up being over 100 pages, and we also had quite a bit in there for child, protection on social media and children. There's a lot of testimony that we heard about the damages to young girls and young boys. It's really staggering. So the bill passed the House, went to the Senate. It passed both, then it was vetoed by the governor, and it came back, and then we have to vote on it again in veto session. And it was the one bill that was not, we didn't have the votes. In the House, we passed for it to override the veto, and Mike Marcotte, a Republican, brought a lot of Republicans over, a lot of Democrats. I think it was like 137 to like 13 or something. Wow. And then it went to the Senate, and it died in the Senate because of lobbying and other sorts of reasons. So we'll be taking that up again. 14 states, I believe, 14 states have some degree of legislation protecting rights and data rights, and Vermont was pushing it forward. And private right of action, that part of it, which companies did not want to have that part in there.
Right.
And it was part of the problem.
Right.
But what it means is you as an individual can take private right of action. You can take action against someone who has not obeyed the law or misused your data. And we felt that that was really an important part of the law that we didn't want to strip out. And anyways, the whole bill didn't pass. However, next term, I'm sure we're going to be looking at it again. And that's something as a new legislator, I didn't fully understand until I experienced this. Yeah. The disappointment. You work so hard, you hear so much testimony, and then at the last minute, the Senate didn't have the votes, and it was very disappointing. But on the other hand, you get to come back and do it again. Yeah. And the work that was done on that bill is helping other states. And hopefully sometime the federal level, we could have some privacy legislation to protect us. But until that, Vermont, we're going to give it a go again. And the Attorney General was very supportive of the bill and worked really hard too with our committee to get this great bill. So
I think it's phenomenal that Vermont's on the forefront with
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we have some really great legislators up there, really smart, hardworking people that I'm really proud to serve with. Yeah.
That's amazing. So, one of the things that I feel like I hear so often these days, and honestly, my entire life, I told you I grew up in a Reagan household, and I think it was really drilled into the American psyche at that time that government is the problem. government is inefficient, government is corrupt. It's always the biggest issue that's holding America back and holding Americans back is this idea, is this drag of government. And it's been so damaging to our national psychology. How do we combat that? What gives you hope that we can come back from that? Because I meet in doing this sort of thing people like you and Christy Morris and Alice Emmons and our amazing senators. These are people who, you know, are extremely knowledgeable about the legislation that they're approaching and want the best for their constituents. How do we turn that part of the American ship around? You know, not just locally in Vermont, but in a big way. What gives you hope that we can?
Well, I'm a small business. I'm a nurse. I have a master's in community health. Started a lactation business when I moved back from Australia to Florida, and long-term breastfeeding was like 7 weeks or something. So I said, let's go knock on doors, businesses, to try to get businesses to be more supportive of breastfeeding. And here, almost 30 years later, you know, I have a pretty vibrant business, small business. And my success in my business couldn't have been done without government. Government paves the roads. They have UPS comes down the road, gets my packages. Do you know, we have internet. We have all these things that are supported by government, right? So when I pay my taxes, I think of those things, that my success I could not have had without government helping me. And I think we need to start talking about how government helps us. We have DMVs, right? We have rules of the road. We provide transportation. We have paved roads, most of the time with not too big of potholes. We have, in Chester, we have municipal sewer. We have municipal water. I mean, so when we're looking at economic development and those kinds of things, I think we need to really take stock of what government does do and what they do well. They certainly don't need to be in every sphere that we start going in, like in our doctor's offices or, right? That's overreach of government. Right. But I think sometimes we need to celebrate what government does. The suicide bill to prevent suicide, that, you know, to have some regulation and organization around trade, all sorts of other things. So I'm hopeful about that. I'm also hopeful that our communities are going to come together. I think we need a lot of healing right now. It's been very tribalistic recently, and it's hurtful to a lot of people. So I'm hoping we can get past this next election and start healing. And that's hopeful to me. My community means a lot to me, and the 4 communities that I represent. On Saturday night, I went to 3 of the communities because it's harvest, you know, time and, right. and trick or treat. And to see all the wonderful young kids. One in Wyndham, I went to a dinner and there were more older people, but communities coming together to share dinner. It was really lovely. Then I went to a trunk or treat and saw all these young families that, you know, I want success for those kids. I want a happy Vermont, a healthy Vermont for those kids to live in. And then I went to Athens, and there was another, just a whole lot of kids there with young families, and that gives me hope. And no one's asking you who you're voting for, this or that. You know, we're just in our communities having a good time, eating too much candy.
That's great. I love that, Heather.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sitting down with me for a little while today.
I really appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you so much.
And thank you all for joining us. And remember, democracy is not a spectator sport. If you don't like what you see out there, get your shoulder to the wagon and go out and change something. Thanks so much.